It had been a cold, rainy day in southern Missouri. It was long about the 17th of December. We had done the chores that Thursday evening rather early, had come in to enjoy the supper, the warmth of the home. We'd lingered that evening longer around the supper table than normal. We'd noticed one of the neighbors go by that ran a sawmill out west of town. He had been by our house just a few minutes, maybe 5, when we heard another car hit the bridge at the foot of the hill by our home that we recognized was going much faster than normal. It turned into the gate in front of our home on 2 wheels, screeched to a stop, and hardly before it stopped, our neighbor was knocking at our front doors. It all happened so fast we hadn't even gotten up from the supper table. And when we got there, he said, "Could you come quickly? Mr. Holmes, the neighbor that lived a mile up the road, has turned his tractor over on him." We jumped in our car. The neighbor went back. And when we arrived there in the front yard was the little John Deere MT tractor turned straight over. It had come straight up and straight back. The neighbor that had gone by about 10 minutes before, that had come back for us, when he had stopped at his mailbox, which was about 100 feet from the Holmes' home, he had heard Mrs. Holmes scream, needing help. He jumped in his car and he ran up and he saw the situation and he said, "I know the Huffs are home. I just came by. I saw them all at the supper table. Let me go back and get some help." But in her desperate, frantic plight, with her husband pinned underneath the tractor, she took hold of him hysterically and wouldn't let him go. And she says, "You've got to help. You've got to help." And he says, "It's impossible for me to lift the tractor." He became almost irritated. He said, "Let me go for help." And she wouldn't turn loose. And so in desperation, this man, who was a small man, weighed about 135 pounds, about 5'6", went over and took hold of the axle of that little John Deere tractor, and he lifted. And Mrs. Holmes took her husband by the shoulders, and she pulled him from under the tractor. He quickly carried him in and laid him on the couch and came back to get us for help. I had a 4-door Ford automobile, and we were going to put him in my car and take him to the hospital. But as we endeavored to pick him up from the couch, the pain was too great, and we recognized we needed an ambulance. So I went and called an ambulance. The ambulance came and got him, and he went to the hospital. He was hospitalized for many months. His pelvic bones had been broken. There had been much damage. But after many months and several surgeries, Mr. Holmes recuperated and went back to his job. That evening, after we had sent him to the hospital, we decided that we would turn the tractor back over and upright it and move it out of the driveway. My brother and I were young men that we thought were quite strong. My father was not an invalid by any means, and Mr. Sherman that had lifted the tractor off of him in the first place. The 4 of us went out and we took hold of the axle and we were going to turn the tractor back over. We couldn't even budge it. And he says, "That's impossible. I lifted it enough to take the man out from under it." We tried again. And we tried and we tried. But it was impossible. We went back and got our farm tractor and a chain and we uprighted it. You know, I've often thought of that situation. Why could a little man in an emergency do something that later 4 of us couldn't do? We only came to one answer. God helped. Now we recognize the adrenaline flows greater, and there's a lot of things that happen within the body when emergencies of these transpire. But you know, boys and girls, in the emergency, God gives us superhuman strength. In the emergency, God calls to our memory things that we have learned and that perhaps thought we had forgotten. And so this morning, I would have you remember always to rely totally upon the Lord Jesus Christ. He, in the emergency, will help us do the things that we think we cannot do.